everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are finally going to be taking a look at Ox Gall and synthetic Ox Gall. This is a video that I promised you a long time ago if you've been around the channel for a while, and the reason I haven't brought it to you sooner is because I was trying to research this and find out information about this additive or medium or whatever you want to call it for watercolors. There's not a lot of information out there, and so today I thought we would go ahead and go back to the basics, the ground floor, and do some kind of scientific approach at looking at what this medium does. Today we're going to be looking at the Winsor and Newton Ox Gall. Now, as the name suggests, this is the liquid out of the gallbladder of an ox. So it is not a vegan-friendly art material. It's a bit smelly. I didn't notice it a whole lot while I was doing the whole testing, but if you open the bottle and take a whiff, it smells pretty bad because, you know, it came from the gallbladder of an ox. But it is supposed to increase the wetting and flow of your watercolors when added to your water or the surface of the paper. For those of you who do not want to use animal products or just don't like the idea of putting gallbladder juice on your papers before you paint, there is also synthetic Ox Gall from QoR. Now, the instructions say to use this the same way. I have no idea what this material is made out of. I don't know if it in itself is eco-friendly, but it is supposed to increase the flow of your watercolors when you use it as directed. Now, a lot of different forums and videos online suggest that you can use it in a variety of ways. You can either add it directly to your watercolors in your palette, you can mix it into your water, or you can put it on the surface of your paper. The instructions on these containers say to add it to your water, so that is what we are going to be doing in this particular video. So we are going to go ahead and add this medium to our water using an eyedropper, and the QoR comes with one. The Winsor Newton one does not, but I have an extra one on hand so there isn't any cross-contamination. We are going to have one sheet of paper that is a control group with just water, so we can compare that. We're going to have one with Ox Gall and one with the synthetic Ox Gall. We're also going to do two different concentrations. So the instructions on the QoR say to use between 2 and 5 drops per 8 ounces of water. I have 2-ounce glasses here to be able to fit on the camera. So we are going to go ahead and put 1 drop per 2 ounces, which would fit in that recommended usage for our main swatches that we do. And then I'll also do a second set of swatches that has 2 drops in it. Now that's going to get a little interesting because we're going to see how that interacts with the paints in a little bit. I also have 2 clean buckets of water off camera above the screen that you're going to see me reaching for often every single time that I switch between the Winsor Newton Ox Gall and the synthetic Ox Gall. And from the synthetic Ox Gall back to the water, I will go ahead and rinse out my brush in the clean water so that I'm not contaminating as much as I can control. I'm not going to go to the sink every time and rinse out my brush, you know. We're going to be using 3 different pigments for our tests today. We're going to be using a permanent yellow and a quinacridone magenta from Turner, which I do not believe uses Ox Gall in their paints. The yellows tend not to spread as much as others. And then we're also going to add a Cascade Green from Daniel Smith, which is a very highly granulating separating pigment. Now, all of these pigments I'm going to be adding to our wash areas using a size 6 round brush. I have already put out enough pigment to last all of our swatches so I don't have to remix, I don't have to change the ratio of water to pigment, and they will all be there ready for me. I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch flat brush to apply the water, Ox Gall, and synthetic Ox Gall mixtures to our papers, and we will be using 3 different papers to test these mediums out today. The first one is going to be Canton XL watercolor paper. This is a student grade wood pulp paper that is also happens to be vegan. They don't use any gelatin in their sizing. We also have the Strathmore 500 series, which we're going to be doing last actually, and that is a professional grade vegan paper. Their paper handles very differently compared to other watercolor papers. And we're also going to be using Arch's 140-pound cold press paper, which is what I use on a regular basis, and that is very common, at least here in the US, for professional grade artists. This is sized with gelatins. This is not a vegan product, but it is what I use most often, so I thought it would be helpful for me at least, and I know a lot of you, to see how these mediums react on the papers. And a little spoiler alert, they all handle very differently. Here I'm going to be adding our mediums to our water in 2 different concentrations. So on the left-hand side above each label is 1 drop per 2 ounces, and on the right-hand side there are 2 drops per 2 ounces. Okay, finally we can go ahead and get to the painting. I know we are already 3.5 minutes into this video, and you probably want to see what on earth this stuff does. I'm going to play this at double speed, I think, for most of the video, and this first one I'm going to go ahead and let it play out where I am actually swatching the water on each of the sheets of paper so you can see that process, but I will cut that out in the future papers so that you don't have to sit and watch the same thing over and over. But I'm basically just prepping the paper. I'm trying to get a nice even sheen of water across the whole bottom half of these papers, and you'll see me go back over them a second time just to make sure that the one on the left hand side didn't fully dry by the time I got to the right hand side, so I'm just touching them up there. Then finally, I'm going to be dipping my round brush into those pre-mixed containers of the water and pigment together that are the same concentration. And when I go in between the different mediums, I'm going to be rinsing out my brush and then refilling back up. Now, how I'm making sure that I get the same amount of pigment on each of the brush strokes is that I'm completely rotating the barrel in the water, although you will see on that last one on the QoR synthetic Ox Gall for this specific paper sample, my brush skipped, so I'm actually going to go back and put a tiny bit more pigment on that just because I didn't think it was fair that I didn't put all of the pigment down there. We're going to move through the 3 different colors that way and just kind of watch literally as the paint dries so we can see what it does. This Cascade Green is a really eager pigment, and it just likes to spread, and you can actually see it pushing the magenta color over in that last sample. Here on the top of the page, I'm going ahead and doing the same thing that I did with the bottom sections, and I'm only going to do it on the Ox Gall and synthetic Ox Gall sheets because I don't need to do the water twice. It's going to be the same, but these are the double concentration mixes. Now, I did say that this gets a little bit interesting because I think that I noticed across all the samples, we'll see at the very end, but when we added the amount into the water, it actually had a lessening effect, I think. It doesn't spread out quite as much, at least if you look at those yellow samples. They're pretty, they stay pretty still. I don't know what I was thinking when I did these swatches on the top here for the first sets of paper on the Canton XL. I didn't put the magenta on. I don't know what my thought process was there. I don't know if I just wanted more room for the pigments, but I will do the swatches all the same with the magentas on the next 2 papers. So here are the dried swatches, and Canton XL paper is pretty known for causing backruns because the surface won't dry as evenly because it's a wood pulp paper, not cotton paper. But here you can actually see that both the Ox Gall and the synthetic Ox Gall either change the drying time of the paper or the surface tension of the water, or both, and it actually caused the pigments to backrun even more so. So I don't know that this is a thing that you want to use on a student grade wood pulp paper unless you are specifically going for those backruns. Here we're going to move on to the Arches 140 pound cold press. Again, this is the paper that I use most often, and I was most eager to see how the paints reacted with this paper. One thing to note is if you remember our ultimate paper comparison guide, Arches has a tendency to bring out the most granulation out of the paints, out of everything that we tested. So when we get to the Cascade Green, we're going to see that a lot across all the samples. But here you can see that the paints stay a lot more where we put them, especially on that first water control group paper, than compared to the Canton XL watercolor paper. The Cascade Green still wants to spread out and still wants to do its thing, but the other ones are pretty much staying put. When we get to the Winsor Nude Ox Gall, you can see that it is in fact helping increase the flow of these paints, and they're starting to spread out. And then as we move on to the QoR, we'll wait until they dry to really see the full effects of these, but it's kind of not that much more flowy than the water in the first sample. There's might be a little bit more on the yellow, but the other ones pretty much stayed put. We're going to move up to the top portion of our paper to do that double concentration and see how the paint interacts with those different mediums. You can see as we start to lay down the colors that it actually does a worse job at spreading out the paint flow than the single drop does. So there must be something in the scientific makeup of these papers that there's a very fine balance between how much you want to add to your waters, and more is not necessarily better. Here are the swatches all dried so you can see them, but again, we will take a look at these at the end of the video and compare them across the board. The last paper that we're going to test, of course, is the Strathmore 500 series. Again, this is a vegan-friendly paper. They don't use any gelatin in their sizing, but I also don't find this a terribly pleasant surface to paint on. It's a very, very thirsty paper and likes to soak up a lot of water. Because of this, we're actually going to see the largest difference between the water control page and then the Ox Gall and synthetic Ox Gall swatches from the other two paper samples. The ink, I don't know how it works, but the tension surface and the wetting properties and the flow help this paper to take on this color a lot better, and they tend to be more mobile and less static. I'm going to go ahead and address something else here while this is kind of playing out as well, and that is that you might have seen me touch up a couple of samples specifically on the QoR synthetic Ox Gall swatches, and you're going to see it again in this section as well. And that is because across the board, across all the different samples, the QoR synthetic Ox Gall actually seemed to increase puddling. And I assume that that has something to do with the surface tension of the water and how that absorbs into the paper and everything. But I definitely had a problem, and I was worried about backruns happening. I did try and control them on the Canton XL. I know we still got backruns, but on the Strathmore, you're a little bit more successful in trying to clean those up, but you do still have to watch for them. So that is something to note if you're going to be using the synthetic Ox Gall. Do take a look for backruns, or let me know if you have this issue at all. Like, I don't know if this is just something I ran into. I was trying to be as fair as possible across all my different samples, but I did definitely notice on that specific section of my testing. You'll also notice here, though, that the synthetic Ox Gall really shines in terms of flow when we're using it on the Strathmore 500 series. I feel like in the arches it wasn't as big of a difference. The Ox Gall maybe did a little bit better job. But here on the last swatch here, I'm pretty comfortable saying that there was the most increase in flow on this last swatch with the synthetic Ox Gall. You guys tired of hearing me say Ox Gall yet? I've said it a lot. I'm tired of hearing me say it. I don't know. It's a weird word. It starts sounding fake after a while. Okay, so when I went to go ahead and recap this video to take a look at all the swatches, I was holding them out in front of you, but the video footage actually wasn't very good, and it was hard to see the true colors of the swatches because the video camera just didn't do a great job of capturing that. So I took a couple still frames for you to be able to see, and we can go ahead and compare them here. So here are the dried Canton XL swatches. Once again, we can see that there's a very clear backrun situation on both of the papers. Then we transfer over to, this is the arches on the top and the Strathmore on the bottom. And across the board, I think you can see here that the Strathmore is definitely aided by the Ox Gall and synthetic Ox Gall better than Arches is. Arches, I believe, is a hard size paper. Sizing is another thing that I've tried to research a lot on, and I'm not entirely sure of which papers are hard size and which ones aren't. I know how they handle for me and how I use them in my experience, but I don't know how to put that into terminology just yet. So perhaps more on that later, or if you have any great resources for me, be sure to leave them in the comments below. But you can see here in the top regardless that the Arches does not benefit as much from this medium as the Strathmore 500 does. Finally, I have all three samples laid out side by side so you can really see the full array, and I'll go ahead and let this play on for a little bit so that you can go ahead and see those and compare them, or freeze your frame, or whatever you'd like to do to take a better look at them. A sort of side effect that I wanted to show in this video, and I'm glad that it was pretty apparent, is that when you have a granulating and separating color like this, Cascade Green on the right hand side here, that the more flow that your paper has, the more those colors are going to separate. So whether or not that is something you want is a totally personal decision, and that's going to be up to you. Something else I noticed was that in our water controls, you can see that the yellow holds its own a little bit better than in any of the other samples where you have the magenta really kind of taking over and invading. It's important to remember that using additives of any kind in your painting is going to perhaps change the way that certain pigments interact with each other. So that's something that you're going to have to test out and try on your own for your own colors that you have in your palette. I am probably forgetting something that I wanted to cover during this video, but I don't want to ramble on for too long. Let me know in the comments below if you've used Ox Gall or synthetic Ox Gall or both, and which one you prefer or like better, or if you don't like using it at all. Just let me know your thoughts on it. Like I said, it took me a long time to compile the information for this video, and in the end I still couldn't find that much on it, so the more information we put in the comments below for each other, the better. Just make sure that whatever you're saying is something that you have experience with or know to be as fact. We don't want to spread any rumors about certain products working one way or the other if we don't know how they actually work. So I don't know that I would actually use either of these in my regular painting. I'm not a flowy type of painter. I definitely prefer to work in a more controlled setting, but artists like Fehr do these beautiful, just loose, flowy paintings. I mean, you've seen Angela, you know her work. She's fantastic. Alrighty everyone, that is going to do it for today. I hope this video was worth the wait, or at very least somewhat helpful in learning about Ox Gall. I know there isn't too much out there about this medium, but hopefully we can all learn together. Thank you so much for every comment, like, and subscribe that you leave here on the channel, because we are growing at such a great rate here. We are going to hit 10,000 subscribers soon, which I can't even believe. That's so amazing. I can't wait till that happens, and a special thanks to my patrons over on Patreon. We have all been there for about 10 months now. I just couldn't do any of this without all of your support. So thank you guys so much. I'm so grateful, and I will see you in the next video.